By the time most men realize they're being manipulated by a woman, it's already been happening for weeks, maybe months. And that's not because they weren't paying attention. It's because they were looking for the wrong thing. Most people imagine manipulation as this obvious, dramatic event, a clear power play, a blatant lie, something you can point to and say, there, that's when it started. But that's almost never how it works. What actually happens is quieter, more patient, more methodical than most people want to believe. Before a woman attempts to control your decisions, your emotions, or your behavior, she tests the infrastructure first. She probes the load-bearing walls. She wants to know, what does this man respond to? What does he ignore? What makes him uncomfortable enough to compromise? And she does this so gradually, so naturally, that it doesn't feel like anything at all, until it does. This is about developing the ability to see what's happening before it fully lands, not with paranoia, not with suspicion toward every woman, but with a calibrated, grounded awareness that changes how you read women and how women experience you. 5 behavioral signals, each one easy to miss in isolation. Together, they form a pattern you'll never unsee.
1. The deliberate small violation. It starts with something almost too minor to mention. A joke that lands slightly wrong. A commitment that gets conveniently forgotten. A comment that edges just past the line of what's respectful and then gets immediately softened with humor or a casual pivot. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth confronting directly. And that's precisely the point. What's actually happening here is a form of behavioral calibration. The woman isn't being careless, she's being careful, carefully observing how you respond to a minor breach of your boundaries. Do you let it go entirely? Do you laugh it off? Do you get visibly uncomfortable but say nothing? Each of those responses tells her something valuable. Because a man who absorbs small violations without registering them has, in her mind, implicitly communicated that violations are tolerable, that the threshold is higher than she initially thought. And so her next test is slightly larger, still plausibly deniable, still small enough that addressing it feels disproportionate. The psychology behind this is called incremental boundary erosion. It's the same principle used in negotiation, in sales, in behavioral conditioning. You don't ask for everything at once. You create a baseline of small agreements and then gradually expand what's considered normal within that baseline. The awareness shift here is subtle but critical. You're not looking for dramatic red flags. You're looking for patterns of smallness. Repeated minor moments that, when you step back, reveal a deliberate direction in the early stages of dating. 1 small thing, context. 2 small things, coincidence. 3 small things in a similar vein, information. Start reading the pattern, not just the individual moments.
2. The reaction harvest. Here's something most people don't consciously notice, but every skilled social operator understands intuitively. Before a woman tries to influence you, she needs to map you. She needs to know what topics make you tense, what subjects make you eager to explain yourself, what kind of criticism makes you defensive, what kind of praise makes you suddenly more agreeable. And the way she gathers this information looks completely innocent. It looks like conversation. She brings up a topic, casually, naturally, and watches how you respond. Not necessarily what you say, but how you say it. Whether your energy changes, whether you lean in or pull back, whether you become more guarded or more open. She might gently challenge something you said, not aggressively, just enough to see if you hold your position or start recalibrating to match hers. She might bring up an insecurity adjacent to yours, not pointing at you directly, just floating it nearby to see if you react with recognition. This is called emotional reconnaissance, and it's remarkably effective because the man being mapped rarely realizes it's happening. It feels like getting to know each other in the early stages of dating, and sometimes it genuinely is just that. The distinction, and this is where your own self-awareness becomes the defense, lies in what happens after she's gathered the information. Does it seem like she's learning who you are to understand you better? Or does it seem like she's filing away what she learns for later use? The man who knows himself deeply, his triggers, his sensitivities, his genuine values, is difficult to map accurately because he's already done the internal audit. He's aware of his own architecture, which means when a woman probes, he recognizes the probe. Know yourself before a woman does. 3. Testing your consistency. There's a specific behavioral test that almost every woman runs early in the early stages of dating or romantic interaction. She'll observe what you say you value and then quietly watch to see if your behavior matches it. Not to admire your integrity, to find the gaps. Because the space between what a man says and what he does is where leverage lives. If you say your time is important, but you're always immediately available regardless of what you're doing, that's a gap. If you say you don't tolerate disrespect, but you laugh off dismissive comments aimed at you, that's a gap. If you set a clear expectation and then quietly drop it when it creates friction, that's a gap. Each inconsistency gets noted, not necessarily consciously. A woman doesn't always sit down and analytically catalog your contradictions, but she feels them, and she internalizes one conclusion: his stated positions are negotiable. Once that conclusion forms, it fundamentally changes how she interacts with you. Your words carry less weight because she's learned your words don't always predict your behavior. Here's the subtle power of genuine consistency. It doesn't just protect you from manipulation, it changes the entire social dynamic around you. When she learns, through repeated observation, that you do what you say and say only what you mean, she stops testing. The returns aren't there. Consistency isn't rigidity, it's reliability of character. And it quietly communicates something that no amount of assertive language can replicate. This man means what he says. That single reputation closes more doors to manipulation than almost anything else.
4. The empathy exploit, when your compassion becomes the target. This is the one that catches genuinely good men the hardest, because it doesn't target a weakness, it targets a strength. At some point, once a woman has done enough initial testing and found that direct approaches don't move you easily, she shifts tactics, and the shift is toward vulnerability. Suddenly there's a struggle being shared, a wound being revealed, a moment of apparent openness that pulls on something real in you. Your instinct to care, to protect, to help a woman who seems to genuinely need it. And that instinct is not a flaw. Don't let anyone tell you that caring is a liability. But what you need to understand is that emotional disclosure can be performed just as fluently as it can be genuinely felt, and the two look almost identical on the surface. The behavioral signal to watch for is the timing and function of the vulnerability. Does it appear organically as part of a deepening relationship in the early stages of dating? Or does it appear specifically when you've held a boundary, as if your firmness triggered a sudden need for you to soften? Does the emotional disclosure seem to be moving toward connection, or does it seem to be reliably moving toward you compromising a position you held? Compassion without discernment is a lever, and some women know exactly how to pull it. The recalibration here isn't to become suspicious of vulnerability or to stop caring. It's to separate two things that often get conflated: empathy and obligation. You can fully acknowledge a woman's pain without it automatically becoming your responsibility to resolve it by changing your standards. Those are different things, and keeping them separate is not coldness, it's clarity.
5.
The normalization push, when they start rewriting history. This is the most sophisticated test on this list, and it's the last one before testing ends and something more intentional begins. It's subtle enough that it often gets dismissed as a misunderstanding. It goes something like this. Something happens, an interaction, a decision, a dynamic, and afterward, the version of events that gets referenced doesn't quite match what you remember. Details shift slightly. Your reaction gets described differently than you recall it. What felt like a clear moment of you holding your ground gets recharacterized as you being unreasonable or oversensitive or cold. Not in a dramatic, accusatory way, just slightly differently than reality. And when you bring up your version, there's confusion or gentle insistence that you're misremembering, that you tend to see things in a certain way, that maybe you were tired or in a bad mood or being a little too sensitive. This is called reality testing, and it's one of the early stage behaviors associated with what psychologists call gaslighting. At low levels, it doesn't look extreme. It just feels like a constant low-grade friction between your perception of events and the version being offered back to you. The danger isn't just confusion, it's erosion of trust in your own judgment. And a man who stops trusting his own perception is extraordinarily easy to redirect. The defense is a habit, not a confrontation. Start anchoring. Write things down when they matter. Trust your immediate emotional response to a situation as data worth preserving, even if you don't act on it yet. Build a track record of your own experience that exists independent of her interpretation of it. Because the man who knows what happened, who has a stable, grounded relationship with his own memory and perception, cannot be rewritten. And that stability, more than anything, signals that this particular territory is not worth her trying to claim.
Let's bring this all together. Here's what these 5 signals have in common. None of them, on their own, constitute proof of anything. They're not evidence. They're not reasons to issue accusations or abruptly cut her off. They're information, data points that when you learn to read them, give you something most men never have: time. Time to observe before you commit. Time to identify a pattern before it becomes a problem. Time to make a clear-eyed choice about what this dynamic is and where it's heading before you're already deep inside it. The small violation tests your floor. The reaction harvest maps your emotional architecture. The consistency check reveals your gaps. The empathy exploit targets your compassion. The normalization push erodes your grip on reality. Together, they paint a picture. And once you know what you're looking at, once this becomes part of how you naturally read social dynamics with women, the entire game changes. Not because you become guarded, not because you approach women with suspicion, but because you become the man who sees clearly. And women who rely on things going unnoticed don't spend long around men like that.